Final countdown. Is it in frame? Is it in frame? Nora, is it in frame? Oh, careful. Is it in frame? Is it in frame? Like, can you people? Yeah. Hello. Hello. Okay, everyone. Shh. Go ahead. Put that on. Guys, you guys who are, thank you all for coming. If you can hear me, clap once. Okay, wow, that worked. We should have people come up in the front. So we have a lot of space over here. Guys, if you're in the back, I'm literally gonna come by and like make everyone really quiet. If everyone in the back, guys, we're gonna all have to be quiet, or you guys, if you guys want to chat, you can leave. Yeah, shh. Yeah, guys, quiet, and then quiet, and then turn around and tell the people behind you quiet. And if you guys want to continue chatting, you're more than welcome to go downstairs or outside. But inside, and can someone ask the bartender actually to turn the music off? Whoever's in the back. What? Guys, if you're in the back, can you be quiet, and can someone ask the bartender to turn the music off? Bartender, do you see me? Can you turn the music off?
I think this is Janet Jackson.
Yeah. We're listening to Janet Jackson. Yana, where's Yana? Yana, can you go ask? Oh, can you ask to turn the music off? Okay, and then everyone who's up front, swing around. We're gonna move people around, so come up to the front. Yeah, slowly. Everyone who's up here, like move around up here. Do you guys want to come up? Then do you guys? There's too many people. You're not gonna be able. Yeah, come on. Yeah. Come up. And other people, come up. Like start leading the way, because it's gonna get noisy over there, and you're not gonna be able to hear. I know it sucks, but come on. Come on. Yes, come. There's space over here, and that'll allow people back there. Guys, do you want to come up? You guys. Yeah, come on up. People in the back, people in the back, come up. Otherwise, you're not going to hear. Yeah. A few people more. Excellent. A few. We'll make it work. There's a lot of space up here, and then that'll allow people in the back.
Okay, the audio is going down.
I'm gonna need to.
What? It's okay. I'll do it. Yeah. Oh yeah, come around the back. People who are on that side, come around the back.
Perfect. Sounds now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you guys over there, Tim, can you guys hear? Tim Sheet, can you hear? Can you hear? Come up to the front. Come up. There's like space over here, and then it will make it short. Otherwise, you're literally not going to be able to hear over there. I promise. Okay. I think this is the best we can do. Okay. Thank you all for coming. Actually. can scoot over here.
I didn't pay due prices for this.
Okay, so thank you guys all for coming. I'll try and keep this short for the intro. First, if you're enjoying the event, we have our DeSciNYC Twitter account. We post funny things there. And we have our Instagram account. Raise your hand if you're helping run either the Twitter account or the Instagram account. Or you're taking pictures for it. So give all these people a round of applause. Yeah, raise your hand, stand up, stand up. Yeah, Deja, yeah, Conrad. Yana, where's Yana? Thank you, Yana. Thank you, Yana. Thank you, Victor. Anyone else? Anyone else who's helping to run it? Okay, well, thank you guys. It makes it much easier to do it together with them. And, okay, so, oops, this is wrong, but oh well. If you want to come to the next one is on April 8th, and it's the science of dongs. So, like internet security for cyber-connected sexual devices. We're having a guy who's from Germany. He's very funny, and he's very serious about this, which even adds to the humor. This was our last one. I apologize. I don't know why that's there. Okay, we have these DeSci meetups once a month. This was the one with Brian Johnson. Honestly, this is getting as crowded as that one was, so that's cool. And I hope everyone's like enjoying it and seeing things. Oh shit. Okay, so we're gonna have a hackathon soon. So if people are interested, we're like right now, decentralized science is very much like listening to a lecture and like meeting other people, but I think it would be cool for those that are interested to like win fabulous prizes and create science knowledge. So we're gonna have a hackathon centered around like AI, sleep, and another topic. Climate, yeah. So that'll be really cool. So if you're interested, you can sign up here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about like what sort of sprung up DeSciNYC. Before doing this, I was doing a PhD at Stanford, and I was curious about alternate ways to do science because I was submitting papers and thinking like there must be a better way than like waiting 6 months to hear back and paying like $5,000 and then getting these reviews back. There must be a better way. So I came up with this concept of like prediction markets for science. So how many people were like during the election, you know, you weren't looking at CNN anymore to see who was going to win. You were looking at like Polymarket and saying like, okay, Polymarket is like the new thing that instead of quote unquote experts running the show, instead of like experts running the show, it's going to be like citizens who are incentivized in the correct way. So similarly, the previous way of doing it was like you'd look at Fox News or CNN, depending on which candidate you wanted, and those would be the people that you'd sort of trust. But the problem was those people who were running those things weren't incentivized to actually tell you the truth. They were incentivized to tell you what you wanted to hear. And that today is very similar to how science is done. So science today is just the people who are 60 years old telling the other people, giving grant money to other 60-year-old people and accepting other 60-year-old people's papers into the journal that are run by this same cohort. And it's just this sort of migration of people that all think the same way and all want to do the same thing, but this is just sort of an echo chamber. And what you can do is you can break free of that through the power of money. And you can say, like, instead of just saying hearing what you want to hear, you can actually bet on which science projects you think are going to work and which science projects are not going to work. And if you're correct, you earn money. And if you're incorrect, you lose money. Unfortunately, this is the old set of slides. So we're starting with doing this for sleep, which is really fun. So we're conducting all these distributed sleep trials using an Oura Ring, Whoop, or other type device. And you can participate in figuring out, like, you know, sleep is very important in figuring out what is the future, how aware of the situations you are, how smart you are, how long you're going to live. It's one of the most important predictors of that. So we're trying to create a distributed clinical trial sort of situation where people are testing different drugs, different peptides, different interventions, and people are betting on which of these things are going to work or not. And from this data set that we're collecting, you can sort of submit your data, earn tokens, and then use those tokens to bet on which interventions are actually going to be successful in helping people get better sleep. And then once we have that, expand from there. So if you'd like to work with us, we're hiring. Specifically, we're really looking for designers or game engineers, people who've developed like games, people who are good with social media. So we have all the different roles up there. So if you're looking for a job, or you know someone that is looking for a job, I would encourage you to scan this and apply. Okay. Okay, so now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our... Does anyone have any questions? 3, 2. Okay, everyone's shy. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Professor Anomaly. What a name. That's... I'm sure that's the first time you've ever heard that joke. And he's doing some really interesting stuff around the future of having babies, right? So right now you rely so much on chance when you have a baby, and in the future it's going to be very, very different. And I'll let him take it away with how that's going to happen.
So does the lapel mic actually project out,
No,
or is it just
it's
for
just the microphone.
Got
It's
it.
just for the recording.
Okay.
So you have to
Do you
stand
want
over
it?
here.
Should I use the hand
I
mic?
think you should.
I can actually.
No.
You
Yeah.
should use it.
You should have to use this.
I will. Okay. I used to do this for a living.
Okay.
Giant classroom.
Oh, I'll move out of the way in a second. Let me just get the
Yeah.
first slide to do that.
Sure.
Okay. Go ahead. Oh, let's do a picture. Okay. All right. Smile, everybody. 3, 2, 1. And then we'll do one more. Apologize.
It's okay.
Okay, we'll do one more. All right. So, oh my gosh, you don't even all fit in.
Say babies.
Say babies. Super babies.
Super babies.
Yay. Okay. All right, go ahead.
Dr. Anomaly?
And do you have a clicker?
No, it's just trusted here.
Okay.
Yeah.
In that case, up and press enter.
I can move.
Yes.
You don't have a napkin.
I'll take care of it.
30 more seconds, promise. Still up here.
30 more seconds.
Can you guys hear that? Yeah. All right, good to go.
Go ahead.
You can go.
Okay. In that case, just to set this up here.
And just be quiet during the talk. It's gonna get louder.
Go ahead.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks for having me, guys. Everything here is decentralized, even the production. So, science, camera, everything. All right. So yeah, I'm just gonna probably talk for about 30 minutes. I guess I should say something about how I got interested in this. Some of my old students are here. This is great. We've got Duke, UNC, Penn, and even Ecuador. We've got University of the Americas. Louder? Okay. Yeah. I'll keep this really close. So,
If you guys move up, you're gonna hear it better. Sorry.
no, I'll keep it closer to my mouth. I'm not used to the, I usually use the lapel mic with this, but anyway, yeah, just briefly how I got interested in this topic. Maybe about 10 years ago, I saw that, well, we'd all seen headlines about CRISPR, not much about embryo selection, which is what I'm going to focus on today, but I thought of it as just sort of an interesting intellectual puzzle. I was always interested in game theory and ethics and modeling collective action problems. So what happens when each of us chooses rationally, but the aggregate result is either good or bad from a social standpoint? You know, we tend to think in economics, when there's some good aggregate result, we want more of it. We want to subsidize it, or at least leave people free to create it in the decentralized spirit. And when something's bad, what do? We tax it, we regulate it, we ban it, or we have social norms or moral emotions that have evolved to try to shame people for doing actions that are maybe good for them but socially bad. these are the classes of problems I'm interested in. And I thought, yeah, what's going to happen when we all have the power to shape the genetic endowment of our kids? Is that going to be good or bad from a social standpoint across many people, across many generations? That's the origin story. Maybe it doesn't matter much. Yeah, I wrote up my thoughts in a little book called Creating Future People, The Science and Ethics of Genetic Enhancement. And back in 2022, when I was living in Ecuador, I was contacted by some people who were doing the thing that I wrote about. And I joined the team. We're a company. We're in stealth mode for a bit longer, but I'm going to combine some of what I was thinking about while writing with what I know to be possible now, and specifically with embryo selection. So that's just a brief preface, and let's get started. Okay, so the first question is, what do we know about heritability? And it turns out we can know a lot about heritability without knowing almost anything about genetics. How is that possible? Through twin studies, or so-called behavioral genetics. And the idea here is the specific example that's usually used in the literature is twins that are raised apart but share either all of their genes or half their genes, right? So take monozygotic twins, or triplets, or quadruplets, and sometimes they're adopted out in very different environments, and they're raised, with the same genetic endowment as the other kids in different environments. Can we use that to tease out nature and nurture? And it turns out we can, actually. We can do a pretty good job of that. Any measurable trait, whether it be height, that's easy, personality, medical history, how much of that is influenced by just your genetic endowment versus social factors? And I should say, before I give some heritability scores that we know from twin studies, what does heritability mean? Actually, this is a trick question, so let me ask you guys, who's got a good definition of heritability? Can someone tell me from the audience? This is decentralized after all, yeah.
The variance in a given phenotype that's explained by variance in genetics, and that could be additive or non-additive.
Good. Okay, yeah, the first half of that is sufficient and really nice and simple. So heritability measures the variance within a population, which is really important. That genetics is contributing to a particular phenotype or trait, an outward manifestation of genotype. Could be height, could be health, whatever we're talking about. That's super important. I wasn't going to spend any time on this, but I will because it's frequently misunderstood. If we say that height is 90% heritable, does that mean that it's true everywhere and for everyone? And the answer is no. Why would height be less heritable in some environments than others, even if it's the same genes? Can anyone think of a good reason?
Environmental.
Yeah, nutrition. Yeah, that's the most obvious.
Environment.
Yeah, that's one aspect of the environment. So, I mean, nurture isn't going to do it. It's not going to make you any taller, but nutrition will. Interestingly enough, take a country with big variation in wealth, like India. Take a place like Bangalore. That might be the most extreme. You've got India's Silicon Valley, so the richest people living in really clean conditions with, really good nutrition with some of the poorest people on earth. Will heritability be the same there as it is in England? And the answer is clearly no. The genes are the same, but the heritability score changes. And I wanted to say that simply because, just to get it out of the way, when we use that phrase, often we think of what's inherited genetically. That's sort of true, but it's only true in idealized environments. Okay, so what do we know about the heritability of certain traits? I'm just going to go through a few, just because it's fun, and these are worth knowing about. Height, no surprise, highly heritable. IQ, that actually surprises a lot of people. And again, I will give the caveat that's going to change in different societies. So if you've got unequal access, here's where education actually would matter, at least a bit. It's probably overvalued. I mean, probably people think education does more than it does, but it clearly does influence IQ. There's no doubt about that. So does nutrition. Genetics influences a lot. Personality, I don't know why people are surprised by that. I mean, just if you have a sibling, like, come on, you guys are very different. You grew up in the same household. It's like your mom didn't do that. Well, she did it, but not in the way she thought she did. Political orientation and religiosity are two of my favorites. So both are about 40% heritable. Even if you live in a society that's all and only Muslim, for example. I lived in Saudi Arabia one summer. Who's going to be the most fervent Muslim in that society? Probably the person who has like a higher heritability, like a higher polygenic score for religiosity. Even if it's impossible to be an atheist in a society, people who tend to think in more liberal ways, right? It's probably tracking things like openness and other personality traits. But as it turns out, these things are heritable and probably not surprising. What made us human is our brains and our ability to coordinate action. What did that? It's like a bunch of personality traits and intelligence and stuff like that, right? The ability to read cues from each other, share information, or manipulate people who are sharing information, right? Machiavellianism is also going to be highly heritable. No surprise there, I guess, really, when you think about it. Now I want to say just a bit about how we would understand the genetics of these. So I mentioned that you could just do twin studies over and over again, repeat them across different societies, and you can get a pretty good estimate of how heritable these traits are by just following people up through their lifetimes in very different environments and just measuring how different, how similar are they. Okay, but now let's get into the genetics of it, and then I'll talk about how we can exploit the genetics or our knowledge of the genetics in order to, well, I guess the title of the talk is something about Superbabies. I don't know. It's like a newspaper article, like you have to have a sexy title. But really it's more just in terms of, yeah, if we're doing embryo selection or eventually editing, you know, tinkering around the margins, it's probably not going to be creating anything from scratch anytime soon. Okay, so how do we know something about, you might say, the genetic architecture, the genetic foundations of these traits? And one way to answer that is through genome-wide association studies. So these are only possible once sequencing gets cheap and accurate. And the idea is if you sequence a large number of people and you either pull their medical records like you can do in the UK, because there's an NHS and there's a UK biobank and you can just match people up with their medical records, or you get people to, in the spirit of decentralization again, you could do a private biobank. There are private biobanks where you sequence people, you have to have a large number of people, maybe sequence them for really interesting traits. Maybe you want to figure out something about violence and or extreme passivity. You know, people, you know, they may or may not be in a normal biobank. You might want to go to the places where those people are in order to sequence them, in order to figure out like what makes them tick to some extent that might be different from ordinary people. Mostly these things are going to be additive, so it's going to be similar genes. They just have more or whatever of them. But in some cases, there might be some really unusual genetics for some of these people. So what do we do? Well, you gather all these genotypes, the genetic sequence of all these people, phenotype them, measure how tall they are, do they have breast cancer, diabetes, and with big enough samples, you can create so-called polygenic risk scores. And the idea here is that for most of these traits that are additive, it's not one gene, it's not 10 genes, it's not 20, it's hundreds or thousands of small genetic variants that add up to an overall probability that either an adult has diabetes or will develop it, or that an embryo would develop diabetes given the same kind of nutrition that it would have for another embryo. Same thing goes for schizophrenia, same thing goes for height, for almost anything that you care about. So polygenic risk scores are really just scanning the entire genome, more or less, of millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people, figuring out which genes are correlated with which traits, and then developing polygenic risk scores to be able to predict those traits, particularly for embryos. If you want to know ahead of time, if I implant embryo A rather than embryo B, you might want to know what's the relative chance that embryo A will develop schizophrenia, or will be tall or short or whatever else. Actually, let me ask you another question. How would we know whether polygenic risk scores work unless we wait for, hundreds of thousands of people to be born and then measure them in the future? I mean, how could we possibly know if these things work? You might know, but does anyone know? How can we validate polygenic risk scores using existing people? Yeah.
You use an independent population to confirm or negate whatever the predicted risk score is. So you have a discovery set and a validation set.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one clear way of doing it. So you've got a big biobank like the UK biobank or some other one. You use one part of it to generate your risk scores, and if you want to test how accurate are these, well, you can just access, let's just call it the raw DNA from another part of the biobank, or use another biobank altogether, and just see. You can see how accurate your risk scores are. And some are going to be more accurate and others less. But in other words, you can validate that these things work before a single person was even born if you were using them to guide, for example, embryo selection. Similarly, a more expensive but even better way to do it is take existing brothers and sisters from large families. So they have the same genetic relationship to each other as embryos do in a petri dish, right? And that means if to take a simple trait like height, you can just measure someone, it's really easy to see. You have a polygenic risk score for height, you want to test it out, find a really large religious family, typically is religious, and measure all the brothers and sisters after you've applied your polygenic risk score to their raw DNA and see how accurate it is. I think this is really important because in the future there are going to be a lot of companies offering polygenic risk scores. There already are, and some of them are going to be a lot better than others, and you're always going to want to know, like, how did you validate these? How do we know you're telling the truth? You better publish some stuff here and show us that they actually work. Okay, that's all a preface to the main show here. So how do we influence children's traits then? Well, the old-fashioned way is, of course, mate selection. Sexual selection is the thing that Charles Darwin focused on more than anything else after he invented his theory, right? He wrote a whole book about it. Essentially, when we're selecting a mate, it's often tracking genetic fitness in the following sense. People are attracted to some extent to youthful looks, right? Why would they care about youthful looks? Well, young people are more fertile. So if you want a higher probability you're going to have a kid and the kid will survive into adulthood, go other things equal with a young person or someone who's got a young looking face. What else do we find attractive? A sense of humor. Why do women care so much about a sense of humor? I think probably it has something to do with creative displays of intelligence. I don't know, could be, it's just a guess. But when you find these cross-cultural things, like wherever you go, there are things that people are attracted to. And you think, okay, probably this is tracking something related to fitness, to differential offspring, survivability, and so on. So we already select mates on the basis of these things, right? We find sense of humor attractive, we find facial symmetry attractive, youth, etc., smooth skin. All right, now to the fun stuff. Gene editing is a thing that I'm not going to talk much about, but of course this is going to be the main game in town, I don't know, in a generation or so. I think it's going to take a little while. What's the problem with gene editing now? I think, first of all, we're not even sure that He Jiankui, or however you pronounce his name, even did it. If he did do it, he seemed pretty incompetent. We have the emails from his correspondence with his Stanford mentors, and yeah, it was pretty experimental if he did it at all. There's no direct evidence that he edited the CCR5 gene. Let's say that he did it. That's one gene. But we've got billions of base pairs, and I already mentioned that almost everything you care about is highly polygenic. It involved thousands and thousands of small genetic variants. Well, one of the problems with using CRISPR right now is off-target mutations. Even the successors to CRISPR often produce these. So you want to hit one gene and you accidentally edit another gene. That could be really bad, depending on what it does. And the other thing is, I've mentioned that you could know heritability scores without knowing any genetics. That's sort of true. And then I mentioned one way of figuring out what genes are associated with traits through genome-wide association studies. But as we all know here, correlation and causation are different. And we'd really want to know the full causal influential architecture of the genetics of a trait before we go around editing it, right? So there's really two problems with editing right now, and I'm sure they'll be solved, but right now, we don't really understand the genetic architecture of complex traits, even if we know which of the genetic variants are correlated with those traits. That's not a problem for embryo selection. It's also not a problem for using polygenic scores yourself to figure out, are you predisposed to heart disease? With some probability, polygenic risk score is going to say yes, and here's the probability. And you can do that without knowing why. And we don't know why. And until we know why, you're probably not going to want to CRISPR your kids, even if you could. So now the boring but true part of this, how you can actually influence your kids' traits right now. And there are a couple of companies that are out there in the open, and there are a bunch more that are in stealth that are coming very, very soon. All of which already serve customers, by the way. And that is embryo selection using polygenic scores. So IVF is, of course, in vitro fertilization. PGT is just pre-implantation genetic testing. So, one point to make about this is that the gains from embryo selection using polygenic risk scores depend on the number of embryos you have. And young people in this audience, you're probably familiar, a lot of you are professionals, some work at places like Google or SpaceX or whatever, and they often offer egg freezing as a benefit. Now they're doing it selfishly, they just want you to delay reproduction so you can be a slave to the man or whatever for a few more years. But actually it's probably good for you in the following sense. If you don't yet have a partner, even though it's a bit more efficacious to freeze embryos than eggs, because you'll lose a few eggs when you freeze them and unfreeze them and so on, when you're young, you can get a lot more embryos and at much higher quality. It's shocking how quickly that declines with age. And with age, I mean like after 20, not like after 38 or whatever. Like it's just a continual decline. For men too. Some men, I go around telling men to freeze their sperm now because, sperm mutate, or at least the organs that produce sperm mutate and pass along mutations. And so, older men have higher risks of things like low functioning autism and even to some extent schizophrenia. And so, it can be a good idea to do that for that reason, but also for this reason. Just think about the number of embryos that you have as being a proxy for genetic diversity. The more you have, if you're interested in some trait like schizophrenia runs in your family or extremely short stature, something like that. Well, if you have 10 embryos, probably one of them is like average height or pretty low risk of schizophrenia, and probably 2 or 3 are. It's going to be, in many cases, continuous. And the same thing goes, well, I've got IQ here because that's a sexy one. The best predictors right now, they're still private. The validation studies will be published very soon publicly. But the best predictors say that we can get, about 12 to 15 IQ points in terms of the spread between the lowest and the highest scoring embryo. That's getting pretty close to half of the actual variation. So the actual variation in IQ between 10 embryos is going to be about double that, about 30 points. That's a lot when you think about it, 2 standard deviations. So if you have a large family, what you'll see in front of your eyes is big variance, right? You can have the same parents, but you see really, really big variance in personality and intelligence and height and all kinds of stuff. So, the gains from embryo selection depend on the number of embryos you have. And one way in which this is going to be supercharged, I think it's coming soon. Everyone always says 5 years, though. It's one of those things, in 5 years it'll all be there. I think probably, let's call it 8 years. I'll just be a little bit more conservative. In vitro gametogenesis, what is this? Can someone explain it in like one sentence? What's the quick version of this? I mean, I have a little diagram here, but yeah, why not?
Creating egg cells in the lab.
Yeah, that's a quick way to do it. Creating egg cells in the lab. So taking adult cells, everyone knows these is skin, could be blood, whatever. Taking them, turning them into induced pluripotent stem cells, right? And then from that, you can get any kind of cell. But if you can do that, then you can get an egg. So you could imagine a vial of blood giving you 1,000 egg cells or something, right? It's probably more than that. I'm just making that number up. But imagine going from 3 or 5 embryos to 3,000 or 5,000 embryos. And now suddenly you're talking about enormous variation. There are diminishing returns, I should say that, after certain numbers. Nevertheless, you could like dramatically transform your children just with that alone, even if you never edited a single gene. So that is on the horizon. It's been done in other animals. I assume it will be done on people. Unlike embryo selection, I think it's going to be highly regulated at first. I doubt that the FDA will allow it immediately, but that's what places like Prospera are for. There are startup cities around the world where, of course, people are essentially going to allow and even encourage labs to open up there to basically, operate as an arbitrage for people who want to do this. Okay, so I just thought I'd go through a couple more set pieces and then open it up to Q&A because why not? Although I have a couple of surprising points to make. So what are the benefits of minimizing genetic disease? This is almost boring, right? So obviously, right, longer, better life, healthier life, etc. Social productivity, blah, blah, blah. That's not that interesting. Now, what about IQ? I find this interesting not because I'm an IQ maxer, but because I think a lot of people misunderstand the benefits of IQ. It's obvious that intelligence has something to do with computational power. We all know what, like, one of your dogs is smarter than another. We know what that looks like. Everyone knows, like, I don't even know what intelligence is, or what is an IQ test? We know what it is. Everyone knows when they see it, right? Do IQ tests perfectly capture it? No. But, you know, the ability to solve complex puzzles is something that obviously is a benefit in many ways. But there's something much, much more interesting that economists and game theorists have discovered in the experimental arena that I thought I'd mention. So let's see here. Yeah, why would smarter people live longer or do better on health metrics? There's actually a few possible explanations. Anyone have any ideas here?
Better choices.
Better decisions.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, filtering through, you know, bad information from good. You know, keeping your appointments, going to the doctor, finding the better doctor, not the witch doctor or whatever, right? I mean, that's kind of obvious, but, you know, we underrate it. I mean, you know, everyone in this room, whatever, has passed some basic test, and as Linda Gottfredson, like, says, you know, life is an IQ test in a way, right? You're navigating complexity everywhere. And if you're in this room, you probably have made decent decisions about doctors, but that's not true for everyone, right? They listen to gurus and they just kind of, yeah, they end up succumbing to their cancer. More interestingly, I think, Steve Jobs. Yeah, no, I didn't actually mean him, but yeah, and he is high IQ. Yeah, but I think much more interesting is this lower stuff, and I actually don't think it has anything to do with computational power. Well, obviously scientific innovation does, but cooperation. So groups of high IQ people are more cooperative than groups of lower IQ people. Individuals don't matter that much, but groups do. Anyone have any idea why this would be the case? This is really an odd finding, but yeah.
The overall group goal is more important than individual interests or desires.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, but I don't think it has anything to do with IQ. So the answer was like, maybe the overall group goal, you know, people are thinking about this and sticking to it and, you know, thinking less about themselves. But I don't think smarter people are any less selfish than dumber people.
They can have motivation, take from that strategy and integrate it for their.
There you go. Okay, Ben, my star student from UNC. So yeah, as usual, Ben tries and gets the answer right. You know, nothing has changed in the last 10 years. Yeah, in repeated prisoner's dilemmas or public goods games in economics, these are games, I won't bore you with the details, but where there's some, you know, what's individually rational is not necessarily collectively optimal. So if you invest some now for the sake of the group, you know, you're going to lose it now, but the group will benefit if everyone does it. And again, smarter people aren't, I think, any nicer than less smart people. But what they will do is they'll find the other smart people who make credible pledges, and they'll surround themselves with them, and they'll find strategies together to delay gratification now for bigger rewards later. And so what you get is more cooperation in prisoner's dilemmas and public goods games, and more use of altruistic punishment, where you know that by punishing free riders now, you can get more cooperation in future rounds. Like, the worst thing you want to do is incentivize free riders, right? In a game where there's a conflict between individual and collective interest. So that's kind of interesting, and it's like a metaphor for bigger games that we play every day, whether it's at work or in politics or whatever else. And here I'm drawing on Garrett Jones. He and I wrote a paper a while ago called, let's see here, Cognitive Enhancement and Network Effects, where we actually argue that despite the inequalities that might arise when already smart people are selecting for intelligence, they're actually going to be positive, not negative externalities for other people. Why? Because again, even when they're mean, smarter people tend to be more cooperative and therefore more productive, which has positive externalities in other people. There are negative externalities too, right? I mean, if genetic differences become so big that you can't relate to each other anymore on terms of equality. I mean, imagine like our relationship to chimpanzees. They're lucky that we're nice to them. They're kind of cute and interesting, and so we preserve them. But we use them, they're almost like tools. I mean, we don't give them the right to vote. Like, that's not going to be very interesting, right? And imagine, you know, inequalities that big, you know, that would be actually concerning and interesting. We could talk about that. But in the absence of truly giant inequalities, if you're just talking about, you know, some people boosting IQ by 5 or 8 points or something in a generation, I actually think that's going to be good for everyone, not just for the people who do it. All right, so what traits can we influence now? This is just a random list of some things. Yeah, IQ, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. Some of these autoimmune diseases are important. My grandmother had like 7 of those. So, she was the smartest person in our family and couldn't do anything. Grew up in New York and was a slave to the house because she couldn't leave the house because she had so many autoimmune disorders. What if we could select for her brains and her beauty without the autoimmune disorders, right? I mean, whatever you guys say, I have no hesitation to say what she would say. She would love to not have those disorders. Why should we support genetic selection? So this is more of a stock pitch. Why? Because I think we should be able to argue in favor of these things. Some people are creeped out by it, or they just think it's against God's will or nature or whatever else. I think you should have reasons for selecting in favor of, or at least allowing genetic selection in favor of these traits. The first is just a Darwinian point, and that is that nature, natural selection, sexual selection, they don't necessarily select for human happiness or for human welfare. They create creatures that are good at finding other creatures, that are good at maximizing the numbers of copies of their genes. Viruses are really good at that. Some of us have them right now, The ultimate winners in the evolutionary game of life are not, smart, gentle, kind people. We hope they are. We might be able to make it that way. But the real winners are like viruses, right? They're the things that can exploit and parasitize and that sort of thing. But for the first time in history, we're in a situation where we go, look, we're the product of evolution. We're this mixture of imperfect, emotions. We're jealous, we're mean, we lie to people, but we're also altruistic, and we have ideals like beauty and wisdom and truth, and we can reflect on what things do make a life go well, and we can, to some extent, select for those things, right? What actually makes a life, happy, flourishing in the Aristotelian sense. So nature doesn't necessarily select for that, and in fact, in some cases, the opposite. As soon as you get a lot of really nice, high-trust people, what does nature select for? Psychopathy. According to Steven Pinker, they're about 1% to 2% of the human population. And, it's clear it's an evolutionary strategy precisely to exploit nice people, right? If you can go undetected and, essentially disguise yourself as a contributor to some collective endeavor, but meanwhile, you're just exploiting all those people who contribute, actually, you can probably have a lot of kids before you're found out. And that's why it persists in the population. Maybe it won't persist that much longer, though. Maybe like Tay-Sachs, once we understand the genetics of it, maybe people will select against it. And so maybe we won't be seeing much more of it. So the first point is nature doesn't select for human happiness. It selects for, whatever produces copies of genes. The second point, and this is a big one, and forgive me for quoting a couple of people here, but I think you'll find this interesting. I hope so. Civilization preserves harmful genetic variants, harmful recent mutations. Charles Darwin understood this before the concept of a gene was understood. Gene was coined, I think, in 1907, the term. Everyone knew there must be some unit of heredity that natural selection is acting on. And Charles Darwin understood that whatever this unit is, in a modern civilized society, where we have really good medicine, really good nutrition, he's thinking of England at the time, what it's going to be good at is preserving people who would have died in ancestral conditions because they had poor eyesight. Now we could say childhood cancer. What you're not going to do is say, well, my kid has cancer, throw him to the wolves, right? You're going to try to treat it with chemotherapy and surgery and radiation, and you should. And Darwin thought so too. Of course you should do that. This is the benefit of civilization. But a side effect of that is that the genes that produce those predispositions will almost certainly proliferate in modern populations. That's not a problem in one generation or even two, but across 5, 10, 20 generations, it could actually be a problem. So Darwin says, this is, very colorful language, so forgive me for repeating Darwin, but with savages, the weak in body or mind are soon eliminated. And he's actually recognizing the benefits of this. And those that survive commonly exhibit a vigorous state of health. We civilized men, on the other hand, we British with the crooked teeth and so on, we do our utmost to check the process of elimination. We build asylums for the imbecile, the maimed, and the sick. We institute poor laws, which he supported. Our medical men exert their utmost skill to save every life to the last moment. No one, however, who has attended to the breeding of domestic animals will doubt that this must be highly injurious to the race of man. This is when people wrote with a seriousness. They weren't worried about getting canceled. You can tell he actually cares about people, which is why he's raising this point. He's not signaling his care. This is like a genuine care where you're like, damn, there are real trade-offs between civilization and genetic health, at least over long tracts of time.
Yeah.
There's a good article that I always mention on this because it's so quick, and you can find it by John Tooby just before he died, called The Race Between Germline Gene Editing and Genetic Meltdown. And it's a modern version of this, talking about the proliferation of de novo mutations that are deleterious. So one way we could deal with this, of course, is return to the harsh conditions of, natural selection, throw the kids into the wolves, so to speak. Or we can just let it keep happening, right? And just let people slowly melt down, so to speak. Or, we can steer things in our own direction. We can select for traits that we think are valuable, and we can select against genetic variants that are producing disease or childhood cancer or whatever else. It's pretty clear where I stand on this probably. But I actually think, as a talking point, this gives us a really good case, conservative case. You can think of why a liberal, in the broad sense of that term, would support this, right? It's individual choice. People have their own conceptions of the good. You should allow them to have their own genetic information and choose accordingly, and I agree with that. But conservatives, at least, again, in the broad sense of the term, I hate talking about political parties because they're all retarded, but when you just talk about, what is a conservative in the real sense? It's someone who's like, hang on, rapid social change actually can be harmful. And we can think of people like G.K. Chesterton, who came up with the metaphor famously of Chesterton's fence. Another quiz time again, guys, just to make sure you're still awake. What is Chesterton's fence? Hey, another former student, that's cool. What is Chesterton's fence? Can anyone explain that? What's the... Yeah, oh, we've got a good hand, yeah.
Like metaphorically speaking, if you have a fence, find out why it was propped up and built and specifically put there before you go ahead and have your theories fell. Why to take it down.
Good, yeah, and in fact, he says this in the context of social reformers, and he means kind of radicals, Marxists or radical progressives at the time. He's a conservative and a Christian, and he's saying, look, if you're going to tear a fence down, metaphorically, you should probably know who put it there first and why it was built. There may be very good reasons, and what comes after the fence may be actually quite dangerous. And many conservatives, I think, rightly employ this metaphor. I think it's a very useful metaphor for, really radical social change, because often what comes next is worse than the thing you're trying to fix. Nevertheless, I don't think that Chesterton can be unequivocally used to oppose, for example, genetic enhancement or genetic selection. Here's another metaphor. I call it Chesterton's Post. It's from a book he wrote called Orthodoxy. The other book is Why I'm a Catholic. And here's what he says, and I think you'll like the metaphor. Conservatism, and this is a criticism of conservatism, is based on the idea that if you leave things alone, you leave them as they are, but you do not. You leave a thing alone, or when you leave it alone, you leave it to a torrent of change. If you leave a white post alone, it will soon be a black post. If you particularly want it to be white, any other color, you must always be painting it again. Briefly, if you want the old white post, you must have a new white post. And I think this is a metaphor for, it can be in this realm, for look, we're subject to a torrent of genetic mutations, genetic degradation. There's nothing magical about where we are now. Natural and sexual selection incentivize all kinds of horrible behavior as well as good behavior. Rape is almost certainly natural in the sense of rapists are, in many cases, rewarded with more copies of their genes in future generations. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't be such a universal behavior when one military conquers another military. What do? You kill the men, you rape the women. It's right there in the Bible, right? Kill the men and keep the women folk for yourself, right? This is as old and as normal as can be, and yet it's completely evil, right? So we can agree that rape is both bad and potentially natural. Inclinations to do this could be natural. Is that something that we think is good? Well, this is a kind of, byproduct of an amoral set of forces. But again, we can kind of figure out what's good about human nature, and let's have more of it. What's bad about human nature, and what might be degrading in our genome, let's have less of that. Okay, a couple quick more points to support genetic selection, and I promise these will be much faster. One is the idea of evolutionary mismatch. Everyone's heard this phrase by now. the idea that we've evolved in very different environments than we now live in. Here we are in New York City. This is the perfect example of it. The skyscraper is 100 years old. We haven't adapted to life in tiny apartments using dating apps and things like this. So we've recreated our environments in ways that actually make people more miserable sometimes. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, because if you're the only deviant from a new norm, then you're going to be the weirdo if you're not on the dating app, even if dating apps make everyone worse off. Or if you have some other lifestyle that actually is probably more healthy, like I'm going to go to bed early and not drink any alcohol, like good luck going to the cool kids party and like finding someone to hang out with, right? So, you go to the old folks home instead. So there are all kinds of conditions where our environment is very different than what we're psychologically sort of adapted to or physically adapted to. Everyone uses the example of cheap sugar, refined sugar. Obviously, we have a taste for this, but it's not good for us. I want to use the example of, thinking about how we've recreated environments in ways that are really beneficial to us when used well. Obviously, the internet's kind of boring, but true. We can get all the information we want, which can make us, addicts, which can make us worse off with the dating app example, etc. But if used well, it can make us better off. So what do? We employ strategies, psychological strategies to use these things well. Maybe you have more or less impulse control. But you could also adapt people to the environment as well as adapting the environment to people. And to the extent that the new environments we've created, free of germs, for example, relatively free. We have higher rates of autoimmune diseases, partly as a byproduct of that. Higher rates of asthma, partly as a byproduct of that, because we have fewer microbes and we were adapted to encounter microbes. What do? Well, probably you don't want to go back to a situation where you're just randomly having 40% of your offspring dying in childbirth, but you might actually reintroduce microbes in the hospital or something, like the ancestral microbes. Or if you're George Church, I'm not, but he has a radical solution, which is a lot of the viruses that assail us, that kill us, like influenza, or seriously impair us. I just coughed because I had a virus. Those are relatively recent. It's because of our encounter with animals during the agricultural revolution. We get all of our influenza from other animals. It's very recent. Well, what if we either have artificial meat rather than animals, so we grow them in a lab instead of animals? I'm for that, for a lot of reasons. Or, we adapt ourselves so that we have an immune system that's essentially not capable of being penetrated by viruses. Both solutions are possibilities, but I just want to mention this because I think this is an argument not to go back to where we might have been, but forward to where we might be. Finally, I want to mention one more thing on this slide, and I'll just do a couple more and open it up. And this is sometimes I call these Red Queen effects or arms races from Alice in Wonderland. The point with number 4 here, reason to support genetic selection, it's really not to you guys, you're all in this room. It's to conservatives who are opposed to this, or policymakers who think that by making it illegal or difficult, that they're going to help their own population. What's going to happen? Actually, let me ask this. Does anyone know who most supports gene editing, embryo selection for cognitive ability, for... Oh, well, yeah, sure, yeah. I mean countries. That's actually completely wrong. Everyone thinks that, but we have evidence on it. China is both behind in this and weirdly backward in their attitudes toward heritability. It's India. India is extremely supportive of this, at least on surveys, and Israel. There are a bunch of other countries we just don't have good data for. But we have really good data for India, for Israel, for Singapore. Singapore is very much in favor. I'll show you a slide later. But for whatever reason, I don't know why, but India is much more supportive actually than China is. Maybe that'll all change. I think preference cascades happen once more companies come onto the scene offering this. Anyway, the point is, once some countries or some people are doing this, it's going to create an arms race, which I actually think is socially beneficial. Others are going to be terrified by. And that's because it's going to change incentives. If I know other people are predictably selecting for certain traits, it's going to incentivize me to either select for similar or complementary traits. If most people are selecting girls, then it gives me a stronger incentive to select for a boy. His prospects in the mating market will be a bit better. Other traits will be a little different, and I'll get into how that might work. But arms races are interesting because they can be A, positive and negative, and B, they change the moral landscape. You might have a moral intuition like this is wrong or this is cool or whatever you think, but actually your intuitions are going to change dramatically when most other people are doing this, right? And suddenly it's going to reframe things for policymakers and individuals. And I think it's an important point to make when you're thinking about reasons for selection. Okay, I'll just end on this. This is the topic of my little book. I'm not advertising this. My company paid to make it open access anyway, so I don't make any money off of it. But yeah, you can access a PDF or there's this little version of it. But like I said, what motivated me to write it is just intellectual interest. I was really interested in arms races like evolutionary arms races, like antibiotic resistance and that sort of thing. You know, we take antibiotics and they cure the individual, but a side effect is resistance. And like, how do we solve that problem? You know, perfect econ problem, right? Global intergenerational collective action problem. But this is what I worried about for the book. I think, you know, mostly genetic selection is going to be good, but what about, you know, imbalanced sex ratios, really, really tall boys where everyone selects for height, so there's no relative advantage anymore to being taller because everyone's taller, but we have more, you know, joint problems or cardiac problems as a side effect. You know, these are positional goods arms races where you only want more relative to somebody else, right? It's not like just having it is better. There's nothing good about being tall. There's really only bad things, except given female preferences and given our current environment. It's actually much healthier to have like a gymnast body, right? Like what's your average male gymnast, like 5'7", really healthy, really stocky? You know, like that's probably the ideal male body. But does anyone think that's and it's like, you know, pull the ladies in here and pull the employers and who they're going to hire or vote for president, because that's how ridiculous we are, right? The taller guy is like more authoritative and smarter. Like that's how we think. That's absurd and obviously false. But if everyone chooses that way, you know, you get these kinds of problems. And then immunity monocultures. My solution, pretty simple. This is the boring part. You know, I still think that generally speaking, we should leave people free to choose what they will for their kids. They have the better incentive to figure out what their kids would benefit from and act on it than government agents ever would. So this would be an argument for individual selection rather than, you know, coercive eugenics from a government or something like that. But when we do need a rule to solve a serious collective action problem, this is going back to something the economist side of me would advocate, and that is something like regulatory parsimony. We should have simple laws that apply to all rather than a complex network of rules and laws. And here's why. First of all, if we have really complex laws or restrictive laws, who can get around them? People who can afford to travel. You know, India is a big place for organ markets. People travel there to get a new organ. But because, you know, India has made it illegal, that actually raises the price even higher. And so now instead of people selling their organ voluntarily, people are kidnapped and murdered for their organs, and then their body is just thrown to the side. Colombia also has a pretty thriving black market in organs as well. So a lot of times when you regulate things like this, you get these unexpected costs as well as benefits. And I'm not sort of preaching about politics here. I'm just sort of saying you got to pay attention to those. Who can afford to get around those laws? It's always the rich and well-connected. And who are the victims of those laws? It's always the poor and poorly connected. Similarly, too many laws can crowd out social norms that can effectively equilibrate arms races. So for example, if we take a situation like sex selection or height selection, first of all, there is a kind of natural limit to how tall you would want your kids to be. Everyone will quickly learn, like if you go above, say 6'3" for men, you do start having these problems. And most people, even if women are attracted to tall men, which they are in general, when they're deliberately choosing the traits of their offspring, they care a lot less about that superficial stuff and more about like health, mental health, well-being, achievement, productivity. Will they have good friends, good relationships? And just like maxing out on like height is not really something that they'll do. Probably better not to ban it, but to just allow that self-equilibration to happen through social norms. Restrictive laws, I already mentioned, black markets and learned helplessness. The more complex something is, the more restrictive it is, the more people tend to just abdicate reason and just follow the rules slavishly. But strangely enough, the more liberty they have, the more incentive they have to figure out, like, okay, what's real here? What is this company promising me? Is it snake oil or is it real? And like, how would I really think about the traits I want my kids to have? So I'm going to end on this slide, and that is 2 recent surveys, one from 2023 in the US and one from Singapore last year. And what this did, just to give you a sense of how many people already support even the more kind of controversial trait, which is intelligence selection. Already people of reproductive age in the US admit, nearly half would select for cognitive ability. Would they edit the genes? It's a little less than that, but a lot of this is just because we can't do that. So it's kind of a weird question to ask. As it's more feasible, maybe they will. But when you look at a place like Singapore, turns out like 60 to 70% would select for cognitive ability. The true answer might be even higher than that. But that's the best survey evidence we have right now. The other questions are about gene editing and SAT prep. Weirdly, like only 80% would do SAT prep. And when you ask them, is it moral? Like 20% say it's immoral. I don't know. Maybe it's because they think it's a collective action problem, and so a solution to it is to just say no one should take SAT prep. Maybe it's actually wise. Anyway, my view of this, and I'll end with this is the tip of the iceberg. This is what people say to surveys, and it's almost half already say they would do this. What they would do when it's a viable option and when it's discovered that, elites, however that's defined, are doing it privately, you can rest assured that we're going to get a preference cascade such that the dominoes will fall very, very quickly. My prediction, I give a lot of stock talks on different topics, but my favorite one right now is called Breaking the Blank Slate. And one of the outcomes of that talk, one of the predictions I make is that there's a lot of lying right now, and there's a lot of pluralistic ignorance. Lying about heritability, people pretending it's not even real, or I don't know anything about heritability, intelligence, it's all fake, and none of it's real. The smarter you are, paradoxically, the more likely you are to deny the reality of intelligence or the heritability of it. In fact, we have data on that. That's literally true. The people who are closest to the truth on heritability scores for psychological traits are the people with the least amount of education. Not intelligence, education. Okay, so that's an indoctrination effect. And repeat what? So people who are closer to what behavioral geneticists know about heritability scores are people with lower levels of education, I should add, and with 2 or more children, rather than people who are highly educated and have no children. Why is that? One is highly ideologically motivated. The other is just like looking at reality and going, damn, one of my kids is kind of dumb and the other one's not. Or, like one of them is like really aggressive and I'm so nice to him and he just won't shut up and he's like really mean. And they're just like, yeah, I didn't do that. It's just him. Like, that's just how he was.
The midwit meme.
The midwit meme. Yeah, you've got I won't even repeat it. So anyway, like the thesis is, maybe I'm wrong about this. I'd like to hear what you guys have to say. This is what I'll end on. I think what'll happen is when this stuff is more of a reality, and some of us are already in companies doing it, and more of those companies will be coming out really soon, and people are incentivized to learn about how polygenic scores work, I think they're going to talk more about it. Elites are going to be privately doing it. I can already name names, but I won't do it. Even people who publicly denounce heritability or publicly denounce IVF are customers in many cases. And what's going to happen is there's an increasing kind of dissonance between what certain elites are saying and what people are doing privately and understand privately until, we get a Berlin Wall type situation where everyone just goes, yeah, okay, we know about that stuff. Other people are doing it. I'm going to do it too. And I think what's going to happen is these numbers, even 5 years from now, 10 years from now, are going to look very, very different. So I'll end on that. Thank you.
Let's do some questions, right? Oh, wait, we're not ending. You have questions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But first, we want to give you a tardigrade for Living Forever, and then a Make Science Great Again T-shirt.
Beautiful. All right.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
It's red too.
I know what's going on.
All right. Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So earlier.
Thanks, guys.
or,
Yeah.
earlier in your presentation, you contrasted gene editing with polygenic score screening based on the idea that for gene editing, you need to know the causal impact of genetic variants, whereas with PGS, you don't. But I guess my sense is that I think for PGS, you also need to know which genetic variants are causal and which are not. Otherwise, your polygenic score is going to be picking up on
Here, take the microphone, please. Here, come take the mic.
Should I repeat my
Yeah,
question?
take.
Yeah. So,
Guys, if you want to go, but if you want to stay, listen to the question.
Yeah, so my question was basically that earlier in Dr. Anomaly's presentation, he contrasted gene editing with polygenic score screening based on the idea that for gene editing, you need to know the causal impact of the variants in question, whereas with PGS, you may not need to know that information. And my thinking was that you still need to know the causal impact for polygenic score-based screening, because otherwise your polygenic score will simply pick up on environmental confounds. And that could very well be true even if you validate it out of sample, because your out of sample data set could also be containing those same environmental confounds.
Sure. Okay. Good. So you're also testing the limits of my knowledge because I'm not a statistical geneticist. But what I would say is that's almost true, but not quite, as far as I can tell. The reason is that, so think of most complex traits we care about. Let's just say height or diabetes risk. They're additive, right? So it's lots of genetic variants adding just a little bit to the risk. You know, how you metabolize sugar, whatever. If you miss a few genes or you get a few wrong calls and you're selecting embryos, you're still selecting among, I hate the word natural, but natural combinations of sperm and egg, and you're not fundamentally really changing anything. You're just kind of counting how much the risk is. But I think there's at least a higher risk that if you're changing a variant that you're including in your polygenic risk score, there's a higher chance probably that you could do something that with it that you don't really understand the full consequences of. I could be wrong about that, but that's my sense.
Yeah, I think I agree that gene editing is probably requires perhaps more information, but I think maybe where I might disagree is I think PGS space screening still requires understanding the causal impact.
But okay, let me just ask a quick one, and then we'll move on. But we don't know a lot of causal information. So right now, are you worried about polygenic screening in the absence of knowledge of causal?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yes, so there was a meta-analysis of within sibling-based genome-wide association studies, which do estimate the causal impact of these variants on traits like IQ, and they found that there is a pretty meaningful difference between within sibling GWAS versus population-level GWAS for behavioral traits like IQ. And so the risk is that if you estimate the polygenic scores without using sibling information,
studies, yes.
then your polygenic score may be picking up on environmental biases instead of genetic variants.
This is a great point, and this is why sibling studies are better, in my view, for psychological traits than they are for something like height, something like that. Yeah, I think that's exactly. Somebody?
IQ is highly dependent on different factors, like Shavasana is giving you 7 to 15 points in IQ jump just after half an hour of this exercise. Or knowing complex models that are not taught in schools about everyday stuff, everyday things, is making you much smarter than average person. So how is this choice of causality between IQ and genes, what does it have to do with a special knowledge that allow you to be more effective, like physical exercise, nutrition, model knowledge, and etc.
Is the question that you're skeptical that IQ is meaningful or something?
Yeah. I mean, not every education is graded equal, kind of. If I know something about
again, not an expert here, but I highly recommend, there's some good general books on this topic. My favorite is a 2-hour read. It's Stuart Ritchie's book, just called Intelligence. It's only like 50 pages long. It's like a pamphlet. It's excellent. It just synthesizes 100 years of knowledge about IQ tests. And one of the things he starts with is Spearman's idea. He wanted to figure out, like, how would I even test intelligence, right? Like, I don't even know where to start. And so he just created complex puzzles for people. And then he'd find that, like, almost any test that he could come up with ended up positively correlating with other tests. And he came up with this concept of G, or general intelligence. And that's basically the kind of shared positive correlation across different kinds of tests. And of course now there are different parts of this test, and I'm not an IQ expert, I've just read a lot of the literature on it. You know, there's of course verbal reasoning, spatial, etc. There are different components, and there is some positive overlap across those, but of course some people have, you know, stronger skills in one arena than in another arena, etc. I would just argue that, yeah, among many ordinary people, IQ is underrated, and among IQ enthusiasts, it's overrated in many cases, because, you know, I think personality traits matter a lot. I think some of the correlates of IQ are doing more explaining than IQ, like patience, self-control. It's not computational power. It's not creativity. It sometimes kind of goes along with it. Maybe it was selected for as a package. But so in that sense, IQ is overrated. But in the sense of, if you think education is going to dramatically affect IQ, you're just wrong about it. It's just not true. People have tried it. It does have a modest effect, but it's just simply not correct to say that, you know, education fundamentally transforms our abilities. Like, if you spend enough time on physics with someone, like, they're going to get good at physics. I can attest that this is not the case. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
I just wanted to pick your
Chaps,
brain.
look at that.
Sorry.
Give them a polygenic score for reflexes. This is great.
I wanted to pick your brain about the bankruptcy of 23andMe and what you think the role impact of
Tell me
that
what
will
you
be.
think, because I don't have thoughts on it.
I don't know.
I honestly don't have much of an opinion on it. So, I mean, I think, well, okay, I'll just say a warning sign. One thing you should all do if you're getting sequenced for whatever reason, or sequencing embryos or anything, is obviously pay attention to the security protocols of the company that you're working with. Because, yeah, that's the main thing that killed 23andMe.
Yeah, next question.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
this
sure.
is first.
Careful, by the way.
Thank you. This is all very interesting. Some of it is even reasonable. I'm kidding. It's the tribute for the day. And a lot of things you said were based on the assumption that parents know what's best for their kids. But if my parents were to decide, I think they would have chosen somebody else, because I came up really fragile physically. But the interesting thing is, socially and economically, I'm doing better than any relative I know, specifically because of my poor health from the early age. And I was very focused on seeking for resources and comfort in everyday life. So the result is way, way better. And honestly, I love my parents, I love my family, but I wouldn't trust them in choosing personal traits for me, because 100%, they would have chosen somebody more obedient, less rebellious, someone easier to upbringing, and probably they had zero knowledge about what kind of world I would be living in and what traits will be beneficial for me, like socially, economically, and otherwise. So what are we going to do with that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, yeah, I like that. Some of my favorite thinkers in history had weirdnesses about them that led to their character. So Adam Smith was clearly autistic, well, Aspie anyway. A lot of the best scientists were highly disagreeable, didn't have good friends because they're kind of just assholes, but that also made them stick to their views even when everyone else was criticizing them for the wrong reasons. My favorite philosopher, Nietzsche, was very sick and, you know, died of some mental illness, maybe got it through syphilis, we're not sure, but you know, he was clearly sick. And yeah, I mean, these are often opportunities to overcome challenges. Nevertheless, I have two general responses, which is, although diversity of traits is good, and in many cases having deficits incentivizes us to try to overcome them, and actually challenges are welcome. You know, this is from my friend Alan Buchanan, who wrote a book on this, used to teach at Duke with me years ago. He sort of says, look, what's going to happen in an enhanced world is we're going to sort of be at higher plateaus where we're going to have even more challenges, right? So like genetic enhancement, for example, might extend lifespan or whatever, but it's not going to solve the problem of jealousy. It's not going to solve the problem of we want to overcome goals, set goals. We're always going to be potentially sick or have all kinds of afflictions that there are going to be disappointed parents. Like that's part of being a parent is a lot of parents are disappointed. And so, one thing is I don't think any of that's going to go away. It's part of the human condition and it might even be ramped up in some ways. The other point though is there is no we in the sense that unless you think the government should be making these decisions for you, which I take it you don't think and I don't think, this technology will be out there. And one of the points that I made with arms races is people are going to be making decisions and then it'll be your parents' decision, like, should I opt out of this? And I think a lot will. A lot of religious groups will just say, I'm not doing this. But a couple generations down, some will be like, shit, like maybe we should, and others will still not do it. And I think we're just going to get more and more divergence as a result. And that is, unless you're willing to engage in massive coercion by governments, part of the human conditions. I think this is sort of Promethean. Like, we're a species, we came from Homo habilis, the tool maker. We're Homo sapiens, like the brainy creature. And like what makes us distinctive is we use our brains to make tools, including cultural tools, scientific tools. And this is like the latest in a set of tools, and that doesn't mean it's going to be good. I think it probably will on net. I'm reasonably confident. But there will be some bad decisions that parents make and some bad outcomes collectively. And we have like lots of these myths in Western civilization. That's a metaphor for that, right? Flying too close to the sun. Prometheus. We've got all of these. And I leave it to you to decide on net, is this good? I think it probably will be, but great questions. Yeah. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Just like a bit of a more simple, maybe like slightly esoteric question. To what extent do you believe in the existence or the experience or the phenomenon of the soul?
Well, good question, but I don't have a very good answer to that. This will be unpopular, I guess, but I'm a bit of a reductionist about that. I'm only now becoming more open-minded to it, though, in the last 5 or 10 years. I was like a rabid atheist as a teenager, right? So kind of the obnoxious new atheist type. Like Dawkins. I mean, I read him as a teenager, Dawkins and Nietzsche and whatever. It's just obviously stupid and ridiculous. All religion is, just manipulation. Simulation arguments and things like that have made me more open-minded. And the sheer insanity of physics, if you really understand it, why we can't answer questions like why is there something rather than nothing, So I'm open to souls. I just don't have deep thoughts about it. So yeah, thank you.
All right, go ahead. Rapid fire. Your turn. Go ahead.
1, 2, 3.
Go ahead.
Okay, 3 more. Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Hey, Doc.
So my question is, have you thought about like the epigenetic concerns with IVF? So for example, like there's certain studies that say that babies born through IVF are at higher risk of certain rare cancers, and that's just one thing that's quantifiable. So I guess my question is A, is there even any truth to this? And then B, have you thought about like the implication of this like as a tech used at like the scale of an entire population?
Great question. Risks of IVF. So I, first of all, always have to say, like, I'm not an expert on this, so do not trust me. Like, anyone who says, like, they're an expert outside of their domain of expertise is, like, someone who shouldn't be listened to. I've looked at the studies. People in my company have looked at the studies. There's one giant problem with basically all of them, almost all of them. Selection effects. Who is the population of people who traditionally have used IVF? Older and have different various medical problems. And so, as they say, well, I can't use that phrase, it's too obnoxious, but, whatever goes into a process comes out of a process. Let's put it that way.
Say garbage
yeah. So, I mean, this is a problem, though, right? So, like, obviously, if male and female age, is partly a proxy for, like, mutation load, if you're getting more mutations as you age, and, you're going to pass those on to your kids, or if there's some other problem, you're passing on the bad news. So this is a problem for all studies on IVF. For the first time in history, people are doing IVF electively and freezing eggs when they're young and so on. So we'll know later. I strongly, strongly doubt that there are serious issues. There may be a couple of small risks with IVF. But anyone who tells you there are these risks, you can't rely on those studies for the reason I mentioned. And what you should always ask for is what's the causal mechanism? Like what would actually cause this? Maybe you'll come up with one. I'm open to it. I don't think there is one right now. It's kind of like with surrogacy. Is there evidence that like going through surrogacy is going to be worse for your kid than? I don't claim to know the answer to that. I don't think so though, unless the surrogate is like drinking alcohol or whatever else. So that's my humble answer. Yeah.
Hi, a few related questions. So in some way we have stopped evolution or stopped natural selection because of the level of healthcare we're providing. So what does that mean to to the future generations? Are we on average getting like weaker and dumber? And related to another point you mentioned that the age of having kids is getting older and older, and you're saying even after 20 we're start to degrade, right? So that means dumber kids. Right, so what's the implication of that? And at the same time, AI obviously is advancing at a great rate, right? So are we just going to, humans are becoming dumber and we're going to rely more and more on AI?
Yes, I don't know. Yeah, everyone's seen the movie Idiocracy. Is there some truth to that? Probably, if demographic patterns. Idiocracy? That's the obvious thing.
Yeah.
Look, I don't know, but these things aren't set in stone. So there are reproductive patterns. We know what they look like. You can look at the studies. But that doesn't mean in 1,000 years or in 100 years they'll stay that way. I take it we're going to get much more genetic divergence. And as Tyler Cowen likes to say, you're either going to be working with AI in the future or subjugated by people who use it, or itself, if it's AGI, who are going to use you. So that's also another argument for paying attention to general intelligence. I think it's there are real risks to not doing that in a world that increasingly rewards cognitive ability and that increasingly manipulates those with low cognitive ability. So it's not inevitable, but yeah, it's a concern over long trajectories. Okay, I guess there's one more, and then we can talk later, you guys. Yeah.
Hi.
I'll hang out.
Sorry, people in the back, we can hear you talking. Shh. We're almost done. You mentioned that obviously, expecting parents, as they are going through genetic selection, they're going to be a little more selfish. They're going to select for genes in their embryos that they want to have in their child, whether that's height, intelligence, and those incentives for what is good for a child you want are not going to necessarily align for what is good for society.
Yeah.
So, and obviously the US is a little behind other countries. I'm so curious, so where does that responsibility lie in terms of how we can make that framework or how we think about these decisions? Are there other countries or other governing bodies that have done a good job thinking ahead of, hey, here are the considerations we want to make? Because obviously, does it lay with the parents? Does it lay with the clinical facilities, the government? Like, what are the things that we're not really thinking about in terms of future planning ahead?
Yeah, good. I mean, this is the problem. Governments are mostly not thinking about it. I think Singapore and the US will be at the forefront here for various reasons. The thing that I would worry about, and I talk about it in chapter 2 of my book, is moral dispositions. So, there are personality traits and moral dispositions we have. Some people call us, in evolutionary game theory, strong reciprocators. We're not mere reciprocators. Bacteria do that. Like, they'll trade favors with each other for selfish interests, right? Like, I'll sacrifice something now so that I get a bigger payoff later. Yeah, we do that, of course. But what's distinctive about most people, other than psychopaths and some other misfits, is that we actually take pleasure, to some extent, in contributing voluntarily to public goods. We have a set of moral emotions. We feel pride in it. We feel guilty if we don't contribute to collectively good endeavors and so on. And I think that people have mixed incentives, like they might want their kid to be, for example, a little less empathetic than average if other people are choosing more empathy. Or some sort of, you might call it parasitic strategies, parasitic in the game theoretic sense. So I would worry a little bit about that. But I don't trust governments to control it. I think that social norms, again, are where it's at. And I don't know, here's a crazy solution that I don't know what I think about, but maybe people will be publicly posting, the kinds of endowments they chose or whatever, right? Or how they selected, either for fun or to participate in something, speaking of 23andMe, like trade your data in exchange for something interesting like Ancestry. Maybe there will be things like this where we see like what people are choosing and we shame people, for choosing in socially, suboptimal ways. Guilt and shame are like super important moral emotions that Darwin spent a lot of time thinking about. And now in kind of, modern liberal societies, we actually underutilize them. We think like shame, it's just bad. You shouldn't shame people. It's like, of course you should shame people. If they engage in antisocial behavior, it's like the best thing you could do. You're morally required to shame people. You're actually a selfish brat if you don't do it. Now, how do we apply that to the reproductive realm? It's super complicated, but I still think that we should rely on these evolved moral emotions and then social norms which tend to track our moral emotions, rather than trying to aggregate it in a forceful way through governments or something. So is that imperfect? Yes. But I don't know what the alternative is. So yeah. Good question. Thanks, guys.
You had one last question, so I think it's...
Oh, yeah, let's talk.
I did. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, of course. Let's talk.
Yeah, so I was just curious, yeah, actually, I was about to ask. I went to the bathroom to the water spill. That was the only thing I cared about was knowing about the 23. What did he say? Oh, okay. Well, trove of data. Let's see. All right. Touch the rock, dude.
Yeah, I mean,
good job. Another great session. Good job. So this we've been talking a little about this.
Thank you. Yeah. From Twitter, yeah.
Twitter.
I couldn't get back to you, but I don't. We should.
I don't remember. Yeah. Which project you went for?
Just like it's just decent.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I'm from crypto. Yeah. Created a marketing staff.
Awesome. Well, yeah. Thanks for joining.
Great.
Yeah, we have a lot to train.
Here in
is like the lighting in here. It's pretty dope. I like how everybody's like supporting, like, this is so cool. Look at this screen. Like, I don't even know what the fuck that is. Like, let me take it down.
Everyone's really into something.
Everyone's like, yo, I got this. It's great. But yeah, I don't know. The more I see this, the more I'm like trying to figure out how to get the stuff I was trying to get done. It's just like, the sooner you start, the sooner you get it done. Like, people eat it up. If you build something, if you make it, look what you did. You made something and people are eating it up. Gotta get something, made something. Oh well.
You gonna do it?
Yeah, I know. It's a lot of, it's a lot.
Yeah, and you got a team of people behind you.
I know, I just gotta like, fearless.
You can do it.
You can do it.
You're creative. You're amazing. You're awesome.
I know, and then like our bot. I know I can do it. Do it.
I know. It's being afraid of your own potential.
I know.
If you're done that, you're still there. So I can't even talk.
I feel like I need to go and like get back to work right now. Oh, you want he's too far away from the Bluetooth.
Decentralized. Agency. We're still on the next one.
Alright, one last picture of each. That's a good one. They see it. That was good. Basically good work. Drive quickly.
We got this, Victor.
Oh my God. I'll be back.
I got it. That was awesome. That was awesome. Yeah, let's do it more next time. A lot of pride today. I feel like it's just kind of, we're the old people now, you know? It's like I've been fucking out about it's like every time I talk about something that happened in college, I'm like, yeah, that was about 10 years ago. You know, I feel like I hit 30 and I was like, I don't care anymore, I'm fine. Like, whatever's gonna happen, it's gonna happen.
Yeah, no, that's how I found my 29th birthday. I was just like, well,
that's the way to be. It's working out well so far.
Yeah, seriously.
So nice to meet you. I'll catch you the next time.
Jader, by the way.
Huh?
Jader.
Oh, Jason.
Jason?
Yeah.
You volunteer with DeSciNYC?
Yeah, I'm in the
Oh, cool. So are you making a real face of it?
Did you put it in the bag? The thing?
Yeah.
That's all I can say.
I mean, you should try it.
Yeah, yeah.
Got it?
So of course, we're going to be putting us in a bill for